Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 28 team selection. We're looking at a game week here where we're 1 week out from Gameweek 29, the blank game week. That's quite big, quite sizable. It has not too many ramifications for the rest of the season, but we've also had so many calamitous events happen to the FPL landscape recently with a lot of the FA Cup instances. Nothing too much when it comes to European games, but the impacts, I'm sure, as you guys know, are Lewis Hall injured out and rest for the season. Gordon is suspended up until game week 31. Isak, a little bit doubtful for the game for West Ham, certainly. We also have Cunha getting an extended ban as well for multiple games and also charged with the FA. We have Mateta injured, but seemingly back for game week 30. So that's kind of the updates in terms of the FPL landscape. It doesn't really affect me too much outside of the Isak news. I do own Hall within my team, but I think one of the perks of having a slightly stronger depth in terms of defense is I don't suffer so much in the need or with the immediate need to make an injury replacement transfer. So I think I will practice patience this week. Potentially we're going to do it twice in a row, rolling. And for the first time, actually, I believe for the entire FPL season, I'll have three transfers. So that's not happened before for myself. And I think it just needs to be done heading towards Game 29. There's just so many options, so many ways that we can go. Things like information over Isak and whether he's going to be totally fine, all things considered for Game Week 30 and beyond. Hall clearly out, so probably going to be a focused transfer over, let's say, Trent and Munoz. These kind of considerations are at the forefront of my mind. If I just quickly recap Game Week 27, we ended up with 55 points. That sends us to, unfortunately, another red arrow for 127,000 in the world. Made the good decision, I think, to bench Isak. Not that it really mattered. Everyone got their auto subs in. I didn't have an auto sub. I just played Dango and it wasn't great. And the Dango transfer, I think in hindsight, looks much worse. I was also considering Dango to Nkunku on the deadline just because I felt like Dango's minutes could be quite frail. And I think they remain the case. But then also Nkunku arguably isn't particularly lovely. He just happened to have a really good game versus Southampton, which tends to happen when you play versus Southampton. The decision to play Beck over Flecken did work out. I should really say Allison, but just tend to pronounce the names in FPL. He had an amazing performance versus PSG, if you ever get the chance to see that. Szczesny as well had a great goalkeeping performances, so we were treated to 2 in 1 night. If you were sort of tuning into Champions League matches, not that it really matters, but from the defense, we got a pretty full house, but nothing exceptional compared to some of the holes that we saw from, let's say, the likes of Colwill, the likes of Cucurella, which some people did own. And to be fair, most people who own Colwill don't own Lewis Hall, so I can only say it still feels good, I think, net to have owned Hall over Colwill when I made a decision many game weeks ago to own Hall instead. And Munoz, once again, still getting an assist despite losing a clean sheet. It would be nice if I could own some of the double-digit hauls. Sure enough, yes, I've benched some of the double-digit hauls. In fact, all of them for Munoz. And that happens sometimes when you're rotating defenders, as well as having a deep team. But I think as long as I'm mostly comfortable with the starting 11 that I field every single week, I can't really feel too bad about some of the sort of odd bench boost or bench boost worthy sort of looking benches that I have week to week. And that's simply because I'm happy with my starting 11. As far as Gabriel, Trent, they got their cleans. Arsenal were pretty flat, but then you also saw a little bit of a reversion, I suppose, to goal scoring form with Arsenal versus PSV. They did play versus a very poor PSV team on the night, but it was an away match, so I think quite important for Arsenal, who have struggled historically within Europe and just generally recently for goals, particularly with the lack of depth that they have within the attacking position. So it's nice to see Trossard score, nice to see Odegaard score a brace in open play, Marino scored, Noneri score. A lot of people were involved within the game, even Jurrien Timber as well. So feeling a little bit more hopeful for Trossard. Hopefully Arsenal have some sort of confidence going forwards, and they don't have the worst of fixtures within the next few matches. Nothing exceptional like the likes of Leicester or Southampton. Those kind of fixtures have slipped past, but looking forwards towards Trossard for the next few weeks as Saka and Martinelli mount their comebacks probably for post-Game Week 29. It's more than likely that Trossard will maintain his minutes because I think it'll take some time for players like Saka and Martinelli to really get enough minutes to be able to come back really fully fit and match fit as well, which will take time, given that a lot of the injuries were muscular and not sort of bone injuries, like in the case of Evan Nilsson, who's actually come back very quickly and faster than we expected. So something to point out there. And Mbumo just really consistent. Palmer Salah, the captaincy swing wasn't so bad. I don't really mind it in the end. I think I would have taken all the chances that Palmer had and gone with the captaincy again if I saw all those chances without seeing the final finishes. So that's all I can say. And then with João Pedro, it seemed like he's been playing quite well. One of the issues that I've mentioned even within my cheat sheet video, which is uploaded, and you can have a look at that whenever you want, is just the idea that Jorginho, João Pedro, and Welbeck are competing for minutes. And unless we actually find out about, let's say, a Matoma injury, still going to be a continuous situation where maybe it'll be a little bit tougher within the medium to long term to understand how good João Pedro's minutes are. But we also know that a wild card is impending for my team. And as long as I can kind of get some João Pedro starts within the short term, I'm happy. Beto seems like he's fine. We don't have any additional news in terms of DCL or Broja. And I'm sure even with the likes of those two players coming off of a pretty extensive injury layoff and Beto playing really well, that I don't see Beto's minutes being harmed really for Gameweek 28 and 29. But beyond that, maybe that's something to consider. Isak seems fine, potentially. We're not going to get news from How, but from the sort of journalists reporting over Newcastle, we got wind of, let's say, the Hall injury and him being out for the season. I'd also argue that they do have quite a big reason to sort of claim every point possible left within the league. I know they sort of rested versus Liverpool. Joe Linton's back, which is nice to see. But I'm hoping that and hopeful that Isak is fine. Worst case, I think Dango coming off the bench isn't something that I have a huge problem with for Gaming 28, or conversely, João Pedro if I decide to start either or. What I don't think is the case is that Dango has amazing minutes, because I still think there's a lot of depth for this Bournemouth team. I probably did make a mistake in hindsight to go for Dango, and that happens in FPL, especially with Evan Nilsson coming back a lot quicker than I anticipated and sort of getting back to match fitness very, very quick. We'll just have to monitor the situation. I think I'd like to give Dango the opportunity, I suppose, to see whether he's actually going to start in Game Week 28. And then for Game Week 29, he's a very easy play if that's the case. And then I just keep him. Or if he needs to be a transfer, maybe let's say on Game Week 29 for a -4 potentially, which doesn't feel great, but we'll just have to monitor the minutes and sort of make an assessment then. That's kind of the case with Dango. And elsewhere, Flecken and Castagna ready to play for Game Week 29, but probably not going to be utilized anytime soon. So moving on towards the Game Week 28 team selection, as per usual, we're going to look at some of these sort of expected market data that we get provided by Rob T very kindly within the FPL community. You can find him on X. Effectively this week, we have some very, very one-sided matches, particularly with Chelsea and Liverpool, no doubt because these are two top offenses versus really, really poor defenses. Liverpool with, I'm not really sure if this is a record this season in terms of expected goals versus a certain team, but they've just come off a pretty tough PSG match. Yes, maybe there's a chance and proclivity for Slot to play a few key players for less minutes, but I also have to think that maybe you still want those players to play, get a little bit of form, I suppose, under their feet. There's a lack of bodies available as well. Bradley, for example, is out, so I still think Trent is someone who's likely to start and then come off the bench or come into the bench. As far as Salah, same sort of situation there, even though Elliott played well. I mean, didn't necessarily play well, just finished well within his one chance within the PSG game, and that was all it took. Alisson was great. I can't really see why he'd go on the bench, so not too worried about that situation. Across the pond with Chelsea, you have Nkunku being quite interesting, I think, as a short-term transfer for a lot of managers, particularly with those, even let's say owning Dango like myself, because that could be a lot of upside in the short term if you can kind of take advantage of such a good fixture. They still looked pretty poor within the European match. I watched most of the European matches on this Thursday night as well, between Spurs, between United, between Chelsea. Can't say I was super impressed with any team, to be honest, that played from the Premier League, but at the end of the day, Chelsea are facing off versus Leicester. That's a really good game. You just can't go past that. Elsewhere, I think we got some pretty even matches. Not too many expected clean sheets available this week outside of the defenders that I need. I've got a Crystal Palace defender in Munoz. I've got a Liverpool defender in Trent. And I've also got Gabriel from Arsenal as well. So looking forward to being able to field these three players, 3 out of 4 of the best clean sheet odds available on this week, with exception to Chelsea. I won't own Colwell or Kuhrer for this week, but I still think for people who actually are looking for a defender this week, they're a really good transfer to go for, even though they do have a really tough fixture on Game Week 29 that you probably have to play your player in just because of the blank. Other than that, I'd mention that the odds surprisingly aren't super, well in favor with Newcastle. That's probably due to the various injury impacts and the doubts within the team. With Tottenham, I'd be very interested to see if this line moves after that really poor European performance. Elsewhere and across the board, I think I'd just like to mention that City are looking quite strong within the sort of goal scoring odds, particularly for this being an away game. So quite interesting in terms of how the markets are reflecting on a team like City and Brighton. These are the teams that are sort of in form right now, at least from an offensive point of view. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Looking at defense, of course, translating those clean sheet odds, and given that I have very strong attacking defenders, I'll just be playing Gabriel Munoz and Trent. I'll be playing Allison easily as well. Once again, not worried really about Trent potentially coming off the bench. Instead, I think the idea that Quansah starts the game does still feel quite bewildering. I think it just makes more sense for Liverpool to almost dominate the game from the start, take control of the game, build opportunities, and then maybe you have Quansah coming off for Trent. Maybe you have Elliott coming on for Salah early within the game for Southampton. Now that is interesting because, of course, that potentially creates a midfield conundrum. Palmer played 76 minutes within his European match, didn't score once again. Chelsea looked pretty poor, I'd say, for the most part within that game. The market goal scoring odds are very, very close between the likes of Palmer and Salah. So one of those situations, once again, where maybe people can have considerations on who to start. Looking at checkthechance.com in terms of the goal scoring odds, very, very close between Palmer and Salah. 51.5% for Salah, 48.5% for Palmer. I really think that that's because the markets are pricing into this an expectation that Salah doesn't play the full game, which I think is a fair guess. Whether I really want to take the punt this week with Palmer is interesting, because I do think that while Southampton and Leicester are both, favorites really for being relegated, and Southampton have been poor, and Leicester specifically have been really poor in terms of just giving a lot of the teams that they've played recently their way, I still think Southampton is quite a ways worse than the likes of, let's say, Chelsea or Leicester rather, and I'll probably still go with Salah here. Not because I've been burned so many times recently, but I just think maybe it's just a mix of watching Chelsea play. I think Leicester just being slightly better as a defense, things like that. And Southampton also just, I feel like they've had more capitulations this season. And it's possible for a team like Liverpool looking for a little bit of a bounce back in terms of momentum to just completely thrash them early doors. It could be wrong, and to be quite honest, I can say that right now. The opportunity of going against, once again, a 185, 195% EO Salah is tempting, just for the point that I could stand to gain a lot if I take that risk. Am I so interested in this theoretical risk for this game week? I don't know, but I've taken these risks the last 2 weeks. It's not gone so great, but I think the opportunity does present itself. It really just comes down to whether I think Salah's minutes will be severely reduced. And I tend to think that it probably won't be, unless he just plays really, really poorly, or Liverpool completely dominate, which is obviously a positive outcome, probably still for the likes of someone like Salah. And so hard to kind of see where I'm at right now. I'm going to say I'm going to Salah captain for now. We'll see whether I change my mind and want a little bit of that upside. I'm going to round out the team with Trossard and Mbeumo, which also means that I'll be putting Dang on the bench, first bench that is. Trossard, as I said, has been flat for me myself, but it's nice to see a little bit of bounce back game for Arsenal within their European match. And as I've been mentioning as well, yes, when we looked at the What We've Learned series, which you can obviously see the latest video for Gameweek 28 coming out, it's not the best in terms of Arsenal's slippage of form within the attack, but their baselines are still incredibly strong. Trossard is still someone who plays really, really good minutes right now. I still think that there's some value from owning Trossard, and hopefully I can get that over the next 2 game weeks before some of the other attacking depth comes back into the team. And we're tending to see that, let's say, Noneri for Sterling is quite a usual substitute. I have to imagine that that's going to be the same case for Gameweek 28, particularly since I think there's a little bit more leeway now within the next European match. They don't really have to go too hard on that. They just have to see out a draw, a win, whatever. I mean, you've got a 6-goal aggregate lead, and you're heading home. So it's a really nice spot for Arsenal to be in. They're probably going to continue their sort of title chase. We'll see what happens there. Hasn't looked good so lately, but we'll see. As far as the front line, though, I'll be playing João Pedro, Isak, and Beto. It just makes more sense for me to just play Isak and kind of treat Isak as someone who starts and plays or is completely rested for the game. I don't really see a world where Isak is going to be rested for the match and somehow find himself on the bench to play 15 to 20 minutes. I think it makes a lot more sense for him to be starting for the match. Newcastle try to go for the win early, and he subs off again, maybe similar to the FA Cup where, due to load management, due to tight ending, whatever the situation is, that Isak comes off, or he just doesn't play at all. So I will play Isak no matter what, given the fixture. I know the flip side of the fixture was actually when I brought in Lewis Hall the first time round, which was West Ham at home, and it went very, very poorly against my way. I believe Bowen scored, and Isak missed a few chances, and I sadly lost one of my first Hall clean sheets. But yeah, looking forward to Isak here. Beto, I'll be playing him as well. Wolves defense, as I've mentioned, as a bit of a trend from a team model perspective and also a kind of market models perspective, has improved quite a bit. So this sort of general baseline improvement of Wolves as a team overall is quite impactful, but they've also just lost Cunha. So hard to say, I guess they'll have the same amount of control or threat within the game, hoping that Beto can do something. He's had plenty of chances, even in the game week previous where he blanked. He was actually really good, had great one-on-one opportunities. Flecken did really well in terms of sort of making himself larger, and Beto missed his chances. So hoping that Beto can kind of redeem himself this week. Looking forward to him once again. Hopefully there's a chance where Young isn't on the pitch and maybe we can take a penalty as well for João Pedro. I just think it's really a consideration between him and Dango for a start. I think both have slightly precarious minutes. I think there's worlds where João Pedro and Dango can both play 90 minutes. I sort of mentioned that within the cheat sheet series. It could be something like Dango starting on the wings and then actually taking the center forward minutes when Evan Nilsson's tired. But the flip side of that is he just comes on as a substitute for Evan Nilsson when Evan Nilsson's tired, or just gets subbed off as he usually does. For João Pedro, it could be the same. It could be the flip side where, let's say, Welbeck and Jorginho start and João Pedro finds himself on the bench. But I'm hoping that some of his recent good performances mean that he can continue to start and that I can benefit from that. So expecting to play João Pedro here. I'd love to listen to some of the press conferences just to see if I can get a little bit more insight as to whether someone like Dango can start. But I really think that that's unlikely. But that's all I can say for this game week. So that's going to be my team selection. As far as captaincy, as I mentioned, it is tempting for me because I do like taking these risks. And it's not necessarily because my rank has been particularly poor for the stage of the season compared to previous seasons, but it's just something that I'd like to take from a risk perspective when it comes to effective ownerships and just looking at situations where, let's say, the dominant captaincy option or the dominant sort of effective ownership option is close with the competing option. And I do think that this is one of the game weeks where that's the case. And I think there is some opportunity in that risk. Now, as I've said, I've been burnt many times this season, and more recently within the last few weeks where the Trossard captaincy, I suppose, worked out the least. And then, of course, the Palmer captaincy last week was a very, very, very minor swing that's, I think, inconsequential in the grand scheme of the season. But that doesn't necessarily, for me, constitute really a learning point. Same thing with, let's say, some of the previous bench hauls. I'll just continue playing as it is. If I sense that there really could be a reduction in solid minutes or my thoughts change, I'll probably move towards the Palmer captaincy just to sort of chase that risk and hopefully benefit from a little bit of upside in that situation. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. Looking forward to a lot of home games for a lot of my players outside of, let's say, the Arsenal and Newcastle players and Beto. But that's it. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys soon. 3 transfers for game week 29. I'm actually looking forward to being able to roll these transfers once again and hopefully craft a team with Haaland in the squad, hopefully available with no issues, and kind of take on that Salah threat from game week 29 onwards, as opposed to potentially this game week here where I might not captain him. So those are my thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Goodbye.